Emma was 9 years old, but the world barely noticed her. She moved through hallways like a shadow, present but invisible, existing in a space where words dared not venture. To most people, teachers, classmates, distant relatives, she was simply the quiet girl, a footnote in their busy lives, someone they acknowledged with polite nods but never truly saw. What they didn't understand was that Emma's silence wasn't a choice. It was a prison she'd been locked in since she was 7 years old. Selective mutism. That was the official diagnosis, written in careful handwriting on medical forms that her mother kept in a blue folder on the kitchen counter. Emma had seen it there countless times while making breakfast, had read the clinical words over and over until they felt as familiar as her own name. But labels never captured the complete truth. They never explained what it felt like to have words building up inside your throat like water behind a dam, desperate to flow out, yet unable to pass the invisible barrier that formed whenever eyes landed on her and lips moved to address her directly. It started in 2nd grade, though Emma's parents couldn't pinpoint exactly when. One day she was raising her hand, answering questions, participating in classroom plays. The next moment everything changed. It happened gradually at first. She'd stop raising her hand in math. Then she stopped volunteering in reading circle. By Halloween, she was completely silent at school, communicating only through nods and head shakes. By Christmas, her teacher called a meeting with her parents. By the end of that school year, they had the diagnosis and a thick folder of information about anxiety disorders, speech therapy, and something called selective mutism. Emma's childhood became a series of therapist appointments. There was Dr. Richardson in the fall of 2nd grade, who sat across from her in a brightly colored office with toys displayed on shelves, trying to get her to talk. There was Mrs. in 3rd grade, who used puppets and songs. There was Dr. in 4th grade, who prescribed medication that made Emma feel foggy and strange, like she was watching her life through thick glass. Her parents tried everything with the patience of people drowning: exposure therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, even a week-long intensive treatment program at a specialized clinic in Boston that cost thousands of dollars and yielded nothing but heartbreak. The worst part wasn't the silence itself. It was watching her parents' faces change over time. Her mother, who had once been vibrant and loud, became quiet too. Emma noticed how her dad stopped mentioning her at work, how family gatherings became awkward minefields where relatives whispered questions about what was wrong with her. Her younger brother Tyler didn't understand. He'd bring friends over, proud of his big sister, then feel humiliated when she couldn't answer their greetings. Emma saw the shame in his eyes, and it twisted something deep inside her. School became torture. Not because of bullying. Most kids simply ignored her, which was almost worse. The truly painful moments were the subtle ones. Teachers calling her name and waiting expectantly. Group projects where she tried desperately to contribute but couldn't form words. Lunch periods spent alone because friendships required conversation. Birthday celebrations where she'd have to endure singing and attention without being able to say thank you. By 4th grade, Emma had learned to make herself smaller, quieter, more invisible. She carried a small whiteboard and markers. She learned to communicate through drawings, through pointing, through elaborate hand gestures that only her family understood. But inside she was screaming. Emma developed an inner world so rich and detailed that it sometimes felt more real than the external one. In her mind, she had conversations with everyone. She was witty, brave, and articulate in her imagination. She performed on stages, gave presentations, told jokes that made people laugh. In her notebooks, hidden in her room, she filled page after page with stories and drawings, every illustration a voice that couldn't escape her lips. These secret pages were her confessional, her therapy, her only honest form of expression. Her parents had started to lose hope by the time they decided to visit Riverside Animal Shelter one cold December afternoon. It wasn't a therapeutic intervention. Her father had simply suggested it as a family outing, something different, something to get everyone out of the house. Emma's mother packed thermoses of hot chocolate. Tyler excited about seeing puppies. Emma expected nothing. She'd learned that expectations only led to disappointment. The shelter smelled of dog food, bleach, and something indefinably sad. Row after row of kennels contained dogs of all sizes and temperaments. Some barked frantically. Others lay in corners, defeated. The shelter worker, an elderly man named Frank with kind eyes, led them through the facility, pointing out various dogs and their stories. There was a border collie mix named Scout, energetic and demanding. A chihuahua named Princess with anxiety issues. A boxer named Tank who had been there for 8 months. Each story was a tragedy, abandoned, abused, neglected. Emma's heart broke with each one. Then Frank stopped at a kennel in the back corner. "And this is Max," he said quietly. "He came to us about 4 months ago. Mixed breed, maybe part golden retriever, part something else. Best guess he's about 3 years old. Found running loose near the highway, undernourished, scared. He's a good boy, real gentle, but he hasn't gotten much interest because he's not flashy like some of the others." Max lay on his bed in the back of the kennel, ignoring the visitors. His coat was a dusty tan color, matted in places. His eyes seemed ancient, holding stories of pain and confusion. He didn't jump up. He didn't perform. He simply raised his head slightly and looked at Emma. Their eyes met for exactly 3 seconds. It was enough. Emma stepped toward the kennel, her small hands reaching through the bars. Max didn't move. He didn't jump or lick her hands or do any of the things shelter dogs typically do. Instead, he rose slowly and walked to her, pressing his head against her palms. It was the gentlest greeting Emma had ever experienced. No demands, no expectations, just acceptance. "Can we?" Emma's father asked, though he already knew the answer. He could see something shifting in his daughter's eyes. Within an hour, the paperwork was signed. Max was theirs. As they drove home, Max sat quietly in the back seat next to Emma. She didn't pet him frantically or try to play. She simply sat beside him, her small hand resting on his solid, warm body, and Max rested his head against her shoulder. When they pulled into the driveway, Emma made a sound, a soft clicking noise with her tongue against the roof of her mouth. It was the first voluntary sound she'd made around another person besides her family in 2 years. Max's ear flickered toward her. His tail moved slowly once, twice, 3 times. In that moment, something extraordinary began to bloom. Neither Emma nor Max could have known that they were about to change each other's lives forever. They only knew that, for the first time in a very long time, they had found someone who understood them without words. The first week with Max was cautious and quiet. Emma's family gave the dog time to adjust to his new home, and surprisingly, Emma seemed to be doing the same. She moved through the house in her usual silent way, but something had shifted in her posture. She was less hunched, less trying to disappear. Her mother noticed it during breakfast on the second morning. Emma's eyes were brighter, more present, more alive than they'd been in months. Max spent his first days exploring the house like an archaeologist discovering ancient ruins. He checked every corner of the living room, sniffed every baseboard, investigated the entire backyard with methodical precision. He was cautious too, his movements tentative, as if he couldn't quite believe this softness and safety were real. He'd been abandoned or mistreated before. That much was obvious from the way he flinched at sudden movements and the wary look that never quite left his eyes. But gradually, over those first 7 days, he began to relax. The real connection started on day 8, during a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Emma was sitting in the corner of the living room, as she often did, surrounded by her sketchbooks and colored pencils. She was drawing a picture of a horse, not realistic, but stylized and beautiful with flowing manes and expressive eyes. Max wandered over and lay down beside her, not demanding attention but simply choosing her company. For over an hour they sat in silence together. Emma drew. Max dozed. Her hand occasionally moved from pencil to his warm fur, stroking absently. Her mother watched from the kitchen, tears forming quietly in her eyes. By the 3rd week, patterns began to emerge. Max started to understand Emma's routines. He'd wait by her bedroom door each morning, ready for their day together. He'd follow her to every room of the house. He'd sit beside her during family meals, not begging. He was too well-mannered for that, but maintaining contact. And Emma, in return, began developing subtle ways to communicate with him that extended beyond words. It started accidentally. One afternoon, Emma wanted Max to come inside from the backyard. She was playing alone, wouldn't have shouted even if she could, so instead she developed a pattern. 2 quick taps on her leg while standing at the back door, followed by a beckoning motion with her hand. Max, who had been investigating something near the fence, looked up immediately. He understood. By the next day, he came running at just the leg taps, without even waiting for the hand motion. Emma's father witnessed this and mentioned it at dinner. "That's incredible," he said. "It's like she's training him." But Emma knew it was different than that. They were training each other, learning a shared language that worked for them both. By spring, when the world outside began blooming into color, Emma and Max had created an entire system of communication. The 2 tap and beckon meant "come here." A single, gentle squeeze of her hand on his neck meant "stay calm, I'm here." 3 quick taps in rapid succession meant "alert." A specific whistle pattern, high note, then 2 lower notes meant playtime. Emma learned to read Max's signals too. When he pressed his head against her knee, it meant "I need comfort." When he positioned himself between her and the door, it meant "I'm protecting you." When he did a small spinning motion, it meant "I'm happy." Her mother started keeping a journal of Emma's progress, though she never showed it to her daughter. Emma made a clicking sound today while petting Max. Not quite words, but genuine vocalization, first time in weeks. Then, a few days later, Emma whispered "good boy" to Max today. Barely audible, but I heard it clearly. She's never attempted human speech in months, but she speaks to him. What amazed her parents most was that Emma seemed to be pushing herself further with Max than any therapy had ever accomplished. When her school's resource specialist mentioned that the district was considering starting an animal-assisted therapy program, Emma's parents immediately volunteered Max. They had nothing to lose, and something told them this might actually help. The first day Max visited Emma's school was transformative. He came on a Friday morning, accompanied by Emma's mother and a handler from a local therapy dog organization who had recently certified Max. Emma's class was gathered in the library, curious but cautious about the golden dog entering their space. Emma sat in the back corner, where she always positioned herself to minimize attention. What happened next surprised everyone. The teacher asked if anyone wanted to sit with Max while she read a story. Typically, Emma would have shrunk further into her corner. Instead, she found herself standing, walking toward the dog. Her classmates watched in astonishment. The quiet girl, the silent girl, was moving with purpose. She sat down cross-legged next to Max, and he immediately rested his head on her leg. As the teacher read a story about a brave knight, Emma's hand never left Max's fur. And when the story ended, and the teacher asked if anyone wanted to share their thoughts, Emma did something unprecedented. She whispered one word, "brave." It was barely audible, a breath more than a word. But 17 children heard it. The teacher heard it. Emma's mother, standing at the back of the room, heard it and couldn't hold back tears. Over the following months, something remarkable unfolded. Emma began to emerge from her silence, not dramatically or suddenly, but gradually, one whispered word at a time. She'd whisper to Max in the presence of others, and somehow, her voice that couldn't form words in regular conversation could form them for him. Her speech therapist, doctor, was fascinated by this phenomenon. She requested that Max be brought to sessions, and the change was undeniable. "It's as if Max is a bridge," doctor explained to Emma's parents during a consultation. "He's not a replacement for human connection, but he's creating a safe space where Emma's brain doesn't trigger the anxiety response that's been silencing her. She's practicing communication in a context where there's zero judgment and complete acceptance. That's powerful therapy." Emma's school implemented the animal-assisted program, and Max became a regular visitor every Friday. Other children began requesting to sit with Emma's dog. Emma started writing notes to her classmates about Max, stories she'd written, facts she'd learned about dogs, thoughts she had about his personality. These notes, pinned to the bulletin board, became the beginning of Emma being known for something other than her silence. But what her parents noticed most was the transformation at home. Emma was standing. She was making more eye contact. She was attempting more words, not just to Max, but to her family. She even laughed one evening, a genuine, delighted laugh when Max did something silly in the backyard. Her brother Tyler began spending more time with her, not out of obligation, but because she was becoming someone he wanted to be around. One evening in May, sitting on the back porch with Max's head in her lap, Emma turned to her mother and whispered something that made her cry tears of absolute joy. "I think Max understands me better than anyone ever has. He doesn't need me to be loud. He just needs me to be real." Her mother sat beside her, placed an arm around her shoulders, and replied softly, "So do we, sweetheart. So do we." Emma leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, one hand on Max, one hand reaching toward her mother's hand. The three of them sat together in the fading sunlight, and for the first time in nearly 3 years, Emma felt completely, utterly understood. Saturday, June 15th, dawned bright and warm, the kind of perfect summer day that forces families out of their houses and into the world. Emma had resisted at first when her parents suggested a trip to Riverside Park. The park meant crowds, meant noise, meant unpredictability. But her father had gently reminded her that Max needed exercise, and Tyler had added his plea, and somehow Emma found herself climbing into the car with her beloved dog, resignation mixed with a quiet acceptance that had become her constant state. Riverside Park was exactly as Emma remembered it, vast and green, dotted with colorful playground equipment, with a sprawling parking lot on one side and winding paths that disappeared into wooded areas. It was 2:47 in the afternoon, that lazy Saturday time when the park was busy but not chaotic. Families scattered across the grass. Children shrieked on the playground. Dogs of various sizes explored every inch of ground, sniffing and playing. Emma's family set up camp on a grassy area near the path that wound toward the dog park. Tyler immediately ran off to the regular playground with their father, both of them laughing about something Emma couldn't quite hear. Her mother settled onto a blanket with a book, giving Emma implicit permission to do as she pleased. Emma chose her favorite spot, a quiet corner of the grass where 2 large oak trees created a canopy of shade. Max settled beside her, his head resting on her lap as she sat cross-legged, her ever-present sketchbook already open on her knees. The afternoon unfolded in its ordinary way. Emma drew while Max dozed. A breeze moved through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed. A dog barked. Life happened around her in its normal, expected fashion. These were the moments Emma had learned to tolerate, being present without being noticed, existing in her own space while the world moved on around her. She had been drawing for approximately 40 minutes when she noticed him. The boy was small, maybe 4 or 5 years old, wearing a red and white striped shirt that made him visible but somehow also easy to overlook among the park's activity. He had hair that stuck up in various directions, the kind of hair that suggested his mother had given up on combing it that morning. Most importantly, he was alone. Completely, utterly alone in a way that made Emma's chest tighten with instinctive alarm. Emma watched as the boy wandered away from the playground area. No adult called after him. No older sibling pulled him back. He simply moved with the single-minded focus of young children, drawn by something in his field of vision, maybe a bird, maybe the shimmer of sunlight on metal, maybe nothing at all that made sense to anyone but him. His trajectory was moving steadily toward the parking lot. Emma's skin prickled. Every cell in her body suddenly felt electric with awareness. She looked toward her mother, who was absorbed in her book, her eyes never leaving the page. She looked toward the playground, where her father and Tyler were nowhere visible, probably on the other side of some structure. She looked back at the boy, who had now wandered almost 20 feet from the playground area, still moving with determined purpose toward the parking lot's perimeter. This was the kind of situation that normally paralyzed Emma. She had learned over years of silence that she couldn't call for help. She couldn't shout warnings. She couldn't do what most people did in moments of crisis: vocalize, alert others, create alarm through sound. But she also couldn't ignore what she was seeing. Some instinct deeper than her selective mutism rose up inside her, a primal awareness that something was wrong. The boy reached the parking lot's edge. Emma's hands began to shake. Her mouth went dry. Max, sensing the sudden shift in her emotional state, lifted his head from her lap and looked at her with acute attention. His entire body tensed, ready, waiting for direction. The parking lot was particularly congested that afternoon. Cars were parked haphazardly, some taking up more than one space. Delivery trucks were lined up along one section, their drivers moving in and out of the nearby grocery store. The lot was a landscape of metal and potential danger for a child who barely reached above the car bumpers. The boy, dressed in his bright striped shirt, was now weaving between vehicles. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run after him, but her voice was locked in its familiar prison, and her legs felt weak with terror and adrenaline. She was paralyzed by her own condition in the exact moment when someone needed her to act. Then something shifted inside her. It wasn't a conscious decision. It wasn't calculated or planned. It was pure instinct, pure desperation, pure faith in the one being who had never failed to understand her. Emma looked at Max, and their eyes locked with the kind of communication that transcended species and language. He knew her. He understood her. He had been waiting all these months for something like this. Without thinking, without hesitation, without allowing fear or doubt to paralyze her, Emma gave Max the signal they had developed but never tested in any real situation. 2 sharp, definitive taps on her leg, urgent, commanding, different from the playful taps they usually shared, followed immediately by a pushing motion of her hand, her arm extending toward the boy, her entire body projecting a single, desperate message: go, help, save him. Max didn't hesitate. He didn't look confused or uncertain. It was as if every moment of their relationship, every shared signal, every whispered word had been preparation for this exact second. The dog exploded from his lying position with a speed and power that belied his calm demeanor. He was pure muscle and purpose, his golden coat streaming like fire as he bolted across the grass toward the parking lot. Emma's hands covered her mouth. Her entire body was shaking. Max was moving faster than she'd ever seen him move, his legs eating up the distance between the shade trees and the parking lot edge in what felt like seconds, but stretched out in Emma's perception like an eternity. The boy in the striped shirt had made it between 2 parked vehicles and was now heading toward an open space where a delivery truck was backing out. Emma could see the truck's reverse lights glowing. She could see the driver's face through the back window, focused on his mirrors, completely unaware of the small child in his path. Max's bark, sharp and commanding, cut through the parking lot noise like a knife through silk. Everything seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Then, impossibly, everything accelerated at once. The truck driver's head snapped up. Other adults in the parking lot turned toward the sound. The boy froze, startled by the sudden appearance of a large golden dog. And Max, magnificent and heroic, positioned himself like a living barrier between the child and the oncoming vehicle. Emma watched it all unfold from her spot beneath the oak trees, her small hands still covering her mouth, her eyes wide with the kind of terror and hope that no 9-year-old should ever have to experience. She had given Max a signal, and he had understood not just the command but the absolute desperate necessity beneath it. The truck began to brake, its backup beeping increasing in urgency. The boy, startled by Max's sudden appearance and bark, stood frozen. Adults in the parking lot started moving, starting to understand that something wrong was happening, that something extraordinary was unfolding before their eyes. Emma's breath caught in her throat, her grip on Max's lifeline, that thin thread of communication they developed together, was the only thing holding her conscious in a moment that suddenly felt far too large for her small, quiet body to contain. Time seemed to fracture into 1,000 crystalline moments, each one distinct and burning bright in Emma's consciousness. She watched, unable to breathe, as Max crossed the parking lot in what felt like slow motion but must have been only seconds. His body moved with perfect athleticism, each muscle working in precise coordination. His golden fur caught the sunlight, creating an almost luminous effect, as if something divine was happening before her eyes. The boy in the striped shirt stood frozen between two parked sedans, unaware of the enormous danger that was seconds away from claiming his small life. The delivery truck, a massive white vehicle with faded lettering on the side, continued its reverse trajectory. The driver's face was visible through the small rear window, concentrated, focused on his mirrors, completely unaware of the tableau unfolding behind his vehicle. Then Max reached the boy. What happened next every expectation. Max didn't jump on the child. He didn't knock him down or create chaos. Instead, with an intelligence that seemed almost human, Max positioned his muscular body like a living wall, placing himself directly between the boy and the truck's oncoming path. His front legs braced, his rear end pressed against the boy's small frame, creating an unmovable barrier of flesh and determination. The boy, startled by the sudden appearance of the large golden dog, stumbled backward and fell onto his diaper-padded bottom, which probably saved his life by lowering his center of gravity. Max's body pressed against him, holding him firmly in place, preventing any forward movement. That's when Max began to bark. It wasn't a playful bark. It wasn't a greeting. It was a primal, urgent, absolutely commanding bark that cut through the ambient noise of the park and parking lot like an alarm bell. The sound carried desperation and authority, a dog using the only voice he possessed to communicate that something was desperately, critically wrong. Woof, woof, woof. The barks echoed off the parked cars. People in the parking lot froze. A woman loading groceries turned. A man pumping gas looked up. A teenager on her phone lowered it to her side. Everyone, simultaneously, oriented toward the sound. The truck driver's head snapped up. In that split second, he must have seen it in his mirrors, the golden dog, the child, the desperate situation. His entire body jerked as understanding crashed into him like a physical blow. His foot stamped hard on the brake pedal. The truck's engine groaned and hissed. Backup beeping became more frantic. Emma's hand was still pressed against her mouth. Her eyes were so wide she thought they might fall out of her head. She was witnessing something impossible, something miraculous. Max was saving a child's life. Her Max, her quiet companion, her translator between worlds. He was a hero. The truck shuddered to a halt, its nose stopping just feet away from Max's position. The delivery driver sat frozen in shock, processing what had almost happened, what he had almost caused. For a long moment, nobody moved. The parking lot held its breath. Then chaos erupted. An older man who had been walking toward the grocery store suddenly ran toward the truck, shouting. A woman in a sundress dropped her purse and sprinted across the parking lot. The boy's mother, who Emma realized must have been in the store, came bursting through the glass doors, already screaming her son's name before she even understood what had happened. Max maintained his position, his body still pressed against the boy, barking continuously until he was absolutely certain that adult humans understood the situation and were moving to help. Only when the boy's mother reached them, scooping her small son into her arms with cries of anguish and relief, only when multiple adults surrounded them with shocked expressions and urgent questions, did Max finally stop barking. Emma watched as Max turned slightly, his eyes finding hers across the distance of parking lot and grass. For a moment, they locked eyes, and in that moment, Emma understood that Max knew exactly what he had done. He knew he had saved a life. He knew he had answered her signal with absolute perfection. The parking lot descended into controlled chaos. The truck driver got out of his cab, his face pale and shaken, repeatedly saying, "I didn't see him, I didn't see him," while people assured him it wasn't his fault, that a dog had saved the boy's life. Someone called 911, though the boy appeared physically unharmed. Park security arrived within minutes. A crowd had begun to gather, people emerging from the grocery store, other park visitors drawn by the commotion. Emma remained frozen beneath her oak trees, watching the scene unfold. Her entire body was trembling. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, making her fingers tingle and her vision occasionally blur. She wanted to run to Max, to hold him, to confirm that he was safe. But she was rooted to her spot, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just transpired. Her mother appeared suddenly, having abandoned her book and her spot on the blanket. She ran toward Emma, her face a mask of confusion and concern. "Emma, what happened? Why are there police cars? What's going on?" Emma pointed wordlessly toward Max and the crowd. Her mother's eyes followed her gesture, then widened in comprehension as she processed the scene. The boy being held by his frantic mother, the truck driver looking traumatized, Max standing in the center of it all like an unexpected hero. "Oh my God," Emma's mother whispered. "Did Max?" Emma nodded, unable to speak, unable to form even her careful whispers. The enormity of what had occurred was beyond language. It was beyond her ability to communicate in any conventional way. Her father appeared with Tyler, both of them also drawn by the sirens and the gathering crowd. They approached carefully, confusion evident on their faces, until Emma's mother explained what she'd witnessed from a distance. Max had somehow prevented a child from being hit by a truck. The boy had wandered into the parking lot, and Max had intervened, saving his life. Police officers were now talking to the boy's mother, taking statements. Other adults were telling their versions of what they'd seen, or what they thought they'd seen, because most people had only heard Max's barking and then seen the aftermath. One woman was pointing toward Emma and her family, apparently explaining that the dog belonged to them. Within minutes, an officer was walking toward Emma, notebook in hand, his expression a mixture of amazement and professional duty. He asked Emma's parents questions. He looked at Emma with intense curiosity, clearly trying to understand the silent girl and her remarkable dog. But Emma couldn't speak. She could only shake her head when he asked if she had trained Max to do this, could only point toward Max when he asked who the dog belonged to. Max, for his part, had walked calmly over to Emma's position, as if his extraordinary act of heroism was simply part of another ordinary Saturday afternoon. He lay down beside her, his breathing still rapid from exertion, his tongue hanging out. Emma wrapped her arms around his neck, and for the first time in a very long time, let herself cry deep, shaking sobs of relief and overwhelming emotion. The paramedics cleared the boy as physically unharmed, though his mother insisted on taking him to the hospital for a complete evaluation. As the emergency vehicles began to disperse and the crowd started to thin, one thing became absolutely clear. Something miraculous had occurred at Riverside Park, something that would be talked about and wondered about for years to come. And at the center of that miracle was a quiet girl and her rescuer dog, bound together by a language that transcended words. The parking lot was starting to return to its ordinary rhythm as emergency vehicles pulled away and the crowd began to disperse. But the questions remained, hovering in the air like humidity on a summer afternoon. How had the dog known? Why had he acted? Who had trained him? Was it instinct or something more calculated? People kept circling back, drawn by the inexplicable nature of what they'd witnessed, desperate for answers that would make sense of the miracle they'd seen. Emma sat on the grass with Max's head in her lap, her fingers buried in his fur as if she might lose him if she let go. Her family had clustered around her protectively, but even they couldn't shield her from the relentless questions. An older woman approached, asking if Max was a service dog. A man with a camera phone wanted to take pictures. A park ranger wanted to document the incident for the park's records. Everyone wanted something from her, wanted her to explain, wanted her to be the source of understanding for what had happened. Emma said nothing. She couldn't. Her mother gently deflected the questions, explaining that Emma was upset, that they needed time to process what had occurred. But the questions kept coming, and Emma could feel the weight of everyone's curiosity, everyone's need for explanation, everyone's assumption that surely someone would speak up and make sense of this. Her father was discussing the incident with a police officer when it happened. He was explaining about Max coming from the shelter, about how they'd only had him for 6 months, about how there had been no formal training. The officer was shaking his head in amazement, saying he'd never seen anything like it, that it must have been pure instinct, that the dog had probably saved that child's life. The kid would have been crushed by that truck, the officer said flatly. No question about it, if that dog hadn't intervened. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone understood the alternative. Emma's eyes were burning. Her throat felt tight, constricted by the weight of everything she wanted to say and couldn't. The injustice of it suddenly crashed over her like a wave. Max had done something extraordinary. Max had proven something impossible, and the world wanted to understand, but nobody could hear her explanation. Nobody could hear the truth from the only person who truly knew what had happened in that moment before Max moved. The moment when she had looked into his eyes and communicated something that transcended training or instinct. She wanted to scream. The urge was so powerful, so overwhelming, that it physically hurt. Emma felt it building in her chest, this desperate need to communicate, to make people understand, to give voice to the connection she shared with Max. Her fingers tightened in his fur. Her breathing became shallow. Her entire body tensed with the pressure of all the words she was holding inside. Her mother noticed immediately. She knelt beside Emma, reading the signs of distress that only a parent could recognize. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything. Everyone understands." But they didn't understand. Not really. Not unless someone explained it. Emma looked at Max. Their eyes met, and she saw in his gaze the same thing she always saw: complete, unconditional acceptance. Max didn't need her to explain. He knew. He had always known. But the world didn't know. The world was standing around making assumptions, giving Max credit for some mysterious instinct, when the truth was far more extraordinary than that. Max had understood her. Max had heard her silent signal, and understood not just the command but the desperate urgency beneath it. Max had answered a call that only he could hear because he was the only one who knew how to listen to her. Emma's chest rose and fell. Her hands trembled. Every cell in her body was screaming with the need to communicate. And for the first time in her life, the need to be understood by others was stronger than the anxiety that usually silenced her. She looked at her mother, then at her father, then at the gathering of strangers and park officials and curious onlookers. She felt Max's solid, grounding presence beneath her hands, and something inside her, something that had been locked away since 2nd grade, something that had been waiting for exactly this moment, exactly this reason, exactly this level of desperation, began to crack open. Emma took a breath that felt like it came from the center of the earth. Her lips moved. Her vocal cords, unused for public speech in years, trembled into action. The sound that emerged was barely more than a whisper, but in the relative quiet of the parking lot, with everyone's attention still oriented toward the drama that had unfolded, it carried with startling clarity. "I told him." 3 words, 4 syllables, a whisper that somehow felt like a shout. Everything stopped. Every conversation paused mid-sentence. Every head turned simultaneously. The police officer stopped writing in his notebook. The park ranger froze mid-step. The random bystanders all oriented toward the small girl sitting on the grass with her dog. Emma's parents gasped, an audible, simultaneous intake of breath that echoed their shock. Emma's mother's hand covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "What did you say, honey?" her father asked, his voice barely steady, as if he was afraid that asking for repetition might break whatever spell had allowed the words to escape. Emma looked directly at the police officer. She took another breath, pulling from some well of courage she didn't know existed. "I told Max what to do," she said, her voice slightly louder now, still whispery but decidedly present. "He saw the boy. I told him to help." The crowd's reaction was instantaneous. Gasps, murmurs, smartphones suddenly recording. The woman with the camera phone was already capturing video. Someone said, "The quiet girl can talk." Another person said, "Oh my God, did she train him somehow?" The officer was writing frantically, trying to document these new revelations. But Emma wasn't looking at any of them. She was looking at Max, and Max was looking at her, and in that mutual gaze was the understanding that had made everything possible. They had done this together. They had communicated something that no one else could quite understand, and in doing so, they had changed everything. Emma's mother pulled her close, holding her tightly while crying openly. Her father joined in, wrapping both of them in his arms. Tyler stood nearby, his expression stunned, as if his sister had just transformed into someone he'd never met before. "I'm so proud of you," Emma's mother whispered into her hair. "So incredibly proud." Emma clung to her mother with one hand while keeping her other hand on Max. The three of them, mother, daughter, and dog, formed a unit that seemed separate from the chaos still unfolding around them. The world was asking questions, recording, processing, trying to make sense of what had happened. But Emma knew the truth. Max had saved a child's life, yes, but in doing so, he had also saved her. He had given her something more valuable than words. He had given her a reason to speak. He had made her understand that some things mattered more than fear, that some truths needed to be told, that sometimes the cost of silence was greater than the terror of speaking. Later, that moment would be analyzed and discussed and dissected 1,000 times. People would ask how Emma had trained Max, how she'd known what to do, how such an extraordinary bond had formed between them. But Emma would always know the simple truth. Max had listened to her when no one else could hear. And when it mattered most, she had found the strength to let him go, trusting completely that he would understand her signal, that he would act, that they would save that child together. The girl who couldn't speak had spoken, and in doing so, she had given the world a glimpse of something far more powerful than voice, the transformative power of being truly, deeply understood. By Sunday morning, the story had exploded across social media like wildfire meeting dry timber. The video of Max's rescue, captured by the woman with the smartphone, had been uploaded to multiple platforms with various hashtags: Dog Hero Animal Miracle Rescue Story Silent Girl Speaks. Within 12 hours, it had over 2 million views. News outlets were calling it the most extraordinary act of animal heroism they'd encountered in years. Emma's family woke to the sound of news vans pulling up outside their quiet suburban home. By 8 a.m., there were 3 of them parked along the street, satellite dishes extending upward like metallic flowers. Reporters stood in this front yard, microphones in hand, practicing their opening lines before the cameras started rolling. Emma watched from behind her bedroom curtains, her stomach twisting with a mixture of terror and something else she couldn't quite name. "This is absolutely crazy," Tyler whispered beside her. "You're actually famous now." Emma didn't respond. She was watching a woman in a pink blazer adjust her hair and practice a concerned expression. The woman was going to tell millions of people about Emma's story, about Max, about selective mutism, a condition that Emma had wanted to keep private, contained, manageable. Now it was being broadcast to strangers. Her mother knocked gently on the door. "They're asking to do interviews. Your father and I want to talk to you about whether you're comfortable with that. There's no pressure. We can send them away if you want." Emma looked at Max, who was lying calmly on her bed, seemingly unaffected by all the chaos outside. She thought about what had happened yesterday at the park. She thought about how speaking those 3 words "I told him" had somehow changed something fundamental inside her. She thought about the child in the striped shirt, who was safe because she'd found the courage to communicate. "I'll do one," Emma whispered, "just one." By noon, a reporter from the local ABC affiliate was sitting in Emma's living room. Her name was Sarah, and she was surprisingly gentle. She didn't ask Emma rapid-fire questions or try to make her speak more than she was comfortable with. Instead, she focused primarily on Emma's parents, letting them explain the story while Emma sat quietly with Max. "Emma has selective mutism," Emma's mother explained, her voice steady despite the emotion flickering across her face. "It's an anxiety disorder that makes it impossible for her to speak in certain social situations. She hasn't been able to speak at school in almost 3 years, and then Max came into our lives and everything changed." Sarah asked about the moment at the park. Emma's father described what he'd understood from witnesses and from what Emma had told them. Sarah asked if Emma would be willing to say anything. Emma nodded slowly and with tremendous effort whispered into the microphone, "Max listens to me." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Emma could see the story crystallizing in the reporter's mind, not just a dog rescue, but something deeper, something about connection and communication and the transformative power of being understood. By 6 p.m. that evening, the segment aired on the local news. By 7 p.m., it had been picked up by regional networks. By the following morning, it was national news. "Silent girl communicates with rescue dog to save child's life," read headlines across the country. Cable news channels were running the story in their morning shows. Psychology experts were being interviewed about selective mutism. Animal behaviorists were asked to explain how a dog could possibly understand such a specific nonverbal command. The attention was overwhelming and relentless. Tuesday morning brought calls from Good Morning America, The Today Show, and several other major networks. Emma's parents had to hire a media coordinator to manage requests. Schools wanted Emma to speak at assemblies. The local animal shelter wanted to host a fundraiser in Emma and Max's honor. A publisher had already reached out about a possible memoir. Children from Emma's school started recognizing her in public. Strangers approached her in the grocery store with tears in their eyes, thanking her for her courage. Emma, who had spent the last 3 years trying to be invisible, was suddenly impossible to ignore. The second interview Emma gave was to a psychologist who specialized in selective mutism for a national morning show. This one was harder. The studio lights were bright and harsh. There were cameras everywhere. The host asked Emma personal questions about her condition, about how it had affected her life, about what it felt like to finally speak publicly. Emma froze. The old paralysis tried to return, the familiar weight crushing down on her chest. Then she felt Max's head press against her leg from beneath the table. She looked down at him and he looked up at her with those soulful brown eyes. Without words, he communicated what he'd been communicating all along. "You're safe. I'm here. You can do this." Emma turned back to the camera and whispered, "It's scary, being quiet, but being understood is worth the risk of being heard." The quote went viral. It was shared on social media hundreds of thousands of times. People with anxiety disorders reached out to Emma through every platform, telling her that her words had given them courage. Mental health advocacy organizations contacted her family about using her story for educational purposes. Universities wanted to study the human-animal bond through the lens of Emma and Max's relationship. Emma's small school district suddenly found itself in the national spotlight. The superintendent released a statement about Emma being an inspiration to students with disabilities. Her teachers began receiving interview requests. Emma's fellow classmates looked at her differently now, not with the casual indifference of before, but with a kind of awe that made Emma deeply uncomfortable. But something unexpected happened within this chaos. Emma kept speaking. Not fluently, not without effort, still mostly in whispers, but with increasing frequency and confidence. She gave a careful interview to a children's magazine about what it felt like to have selective mutism. She participated in a panel discussion about animal-assisted therapy. She spoke at her school's assembly in front of 300 students and parents, with Max by her side. Max didn't save that boy's life because he was trained, Emma said at the assembly, her voice soft but steady. He saved him because he understood me. He listened to me when nobody else could hear me. And sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is just listening, really listening, not trying to fix you, not trying to make you better, just accepting you as you are and waiting for you to find your own voice. The entire auditorium erupted in applause. Parents cried. Teachers held their breath. Emma's mother recorded every second on her phone, this moment of her daughter finally being heard, finally being seen, finally finding her strength. Months passed and the intensity of the media attention gradually decreased, but by then Emma's life had fundamentally transformed. She was no longer the quiet girl. She was Emma, the girl who communicated with her dog, the girl who saved a child's life, the girl who found her voice. Local news wanted to do follow-up stories. Newspapers ran profiles about her journey. Social media followers numbered in the hundreds of thousands. But more importantly, Emma was speaking. In school, to friends, at family dinners, not constantly, not without moments of panic and anxiety, but genuinely, authentically communicating with the world instead of hiding from it. And through it all, Max remained by her side, not as a symbol or a prop, but as the true companion who had made it all possible. The dog who had listened when nobody else could hear. The rescue dog who had rescued the girl who'd rescued him. 3 months after the parking lot rescue, Emma sat in Doctor's office, a space that had become both sanctuary and the walls were soft blue, decorated with calming images of nature. A water fountain burbled gently in the corner. Comfortable seating was arranged in a semicircle, and for the first time, Max occupied his own cushioned dog bed rather than lying on the floor. Doctor was a woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and an almost supernatural patience. She had been Emma's speech therapist on and off for 3 years, but something had fundamentally shifted in their dynamic after the rescue. For the first time, Emma seemed genuinely willing to push herself, genuinely motivated by something beyond her parents' hope or professional obligation. "So, Emma," Doctor said gently, "I noticed you ordered your own lunch at the yesterday. Can you tell me about that?" Emma's heart rate elevated. She glanced at Max, who opened his eyes briefly before returning to his rest. The old instinct was still there, the desire to remain silent, to hand over a note, to avoid the vulnerability of speaking to a stranger. But something inside her had shifted. The 3 words she'd spoken in the parking lot had cracked open something deeper. I wanted chicken," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "The lady asked what dressing I wanted. I said, ranch." It was perhaps the most mundane statement anyone could make. Most people wouldn't even notice it. But in Doctor's eyes, Emma could see the recognition of its monumental significance. Emma had initiated communication with a stranger about something as simple as salad dressing. For a girl with selective mutism, it was equivalent to climbing Mount Everest. "That's wonderful, Emma," Doctor said warmly. "That took real courage. How did it feel?" Emma considered the question. She thought about the moment at the counter, about the way her heart had pounded, about how the server's smile had helped rather than hindered. "Scary," Emma admitted. "But, okay, the lady was nice." What Doctor had discovered over months of working with Emma was that the rescue had fundamentally altered Emma's understanding of what was possible. She had done something terrifying, communicated with Max in a moment of crisis, and the world hadn't ended. More than that, her communication had mattered. It had saved a life. That knowledge lived in Emma's nervous system now, a proof point that her voice had value, that speaking was worth the terror. Over the following weeks, therapy sessions evolved into something more interactive. Doctor incorporated Max into the sessions deliberately, creating a bridge between Emma's comfort zone and the wider world. They would practice ordering food with Max present. Emma would whisper the words first to Max, then repeat them to Doctor, then imagine saying them to a stranger. Gradually, the gap between imagination and reality began to narrow. "I want to try something different today," Doctor said one Thursday afternoon in September. "I want you to tell Max a story. Any story. It can be real or made up. Just speak to him while I listen from across the room. Pretend I'm not here." Emma froze. Telling a story meant sustained speech, meant putting multiple words together in sequence, meant the vulnerability of extended expression. But Max lifted his head and positioned himself closer to her, settling his chin on her lap. She looked down at his patient face and began. "Once there was a dog," Emma whispered, her fingers brushing his ears. "He was lost and sad. He lived in a place where nobody understood him. Then a girl found him and she was lost too. She couldn't speak her words. Nobody understood her either, but the dog understood her. Even when she was quiet, he heard her, and she heard him, and together they were less lost." Emma's voice had grown slightly louder by the end of the story. Her words, while still breathy and soft, carried emotion and intention. Doctor, sitting across the room, had tears streaming down her face. "That was beautiful, Emma," she said quietly. "Thank you for sharing that with me." By October, Emma made a decision that shocked everyone. She wanted to join the school's creative writing club. The club met once a week in the library after school. 12 students sat around a table sharing their work and offering feedback. When Emma walked in with Max, who was now an official school therapy dog allowed in academic settings, the other students whispered. Some pulled out their phones. Emma wanted to turn around and run, but she thought about the boy in the striped shirt. She thought about the courage it had taken to speak 3 words. She sat down. For the first 2 meetings, Emma didn't speak. She listened as other students read their stories and poetry, but she participated in another way. She wrote. She filled her notebook with stories about overcoming fear, about the power of quiet, about finding connection in unexpected places. In the 3rd week, the club leader, Ms., asked if anyone had new material to share. Emma's hand shook as she raised it. Everyone turned to look at her. "I have something," Emma whispered. Can I read it?" Ms. smiled. "Of course, please." Emma's voice trembled as she began reading a story about a girl who couldn't speak and a dog who understood. She read about the secret language they developed. She read about the moment of crisis and the answer that transcended words. She read with increasing confidence, feeling the attention of every person in the room, and instead of wanting to shrivel away, she felt seen, understood. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Ms. started clapping. The other students joined in. Emma looked at Max, and he wagged his tail slowly, as if he too understood the significance of what had just happened. By November, Emma had been invited to speak at the school assembly about mental health awareness. The prospect terrified her. 300 students and parents would be watching, but Doctor helped her prepare, breaking down the speech into manageable pieces, helping her practice with Max as her anchor. The day of the assembly arrived gray and cold. Emma stood backstage, her written speech clenched in her hands, her entire body vibrating with anxiety. Max pressed against her leg, offering his steady presence. Her mother squeezed her shoulders. "You can do this," her mother whispered. "Remember, you're not just speaking for you. You're speaking for everyone who feels like you did." Emma took the stage, Max walking calmly beside her. The auditorium held its breath. A girl with selective mutism, famous from a viral video, was about to speak publicly to her entire school community. Emma's voice started as a whisper, as it always did. But as she spoke about her journey, about the silence, about the terror, about finding a voice through Max, about the realization that connection matters more than perfection, her voice grew stronger. Not to a shout, but to a clear, genuine, audible volume that carried to the back of the auditorium. "I used to think being quiet made me invisible," Emma said, looking out at the sea of faces. "But Max taught me that being quiet doesn't mean you don't have a voice. Sometimes the most powerful communication happens in silence. Sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to speak and having someone who believes in you enough to listen." She spoke for 5 minutes. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium. Teachers were openly crying. Students were recording on their phones, but Emma wasn't looking at them. She was looking at Max, at her parents in the front row, at the tangible proof that she had done the impossible. When she finished, the applause was deafening. Emma stood for a moment, absorbing the weight of being heard, the reality of her own voice carrying meaning and weight in the world. She had done it. She had spoken. Not because she was forced to, not because she was performing for media attention, but because she had something to say and the courage to say it. Exactly 1 year after the parking lot rescue, Emma stood in front of Riverside Animal Shelter with a ceremonial oversized check in her hands. Behind her stood Max, wearing a special vest that read Hero Dog, and beside her was her entire support system. Her parents, her brother, Dr. Ms., and dozens of community members who had become part of her extended family over the past 12 months. The check represented $47,000, funds raised through a book that Emma had published called The Quiet Girl Speaks: My Journey Finding My Voice. Half of the proceeds were going to the animal shelter where Max had been rescued. The other half would establish the Emma and Max Scholarship for children with anxiety and communication disorders who wanted to participate in animal-assisted therapy programs. Frank, the shelter worker who had introduced Emma and Max 1 year ago, stood beside her with tears streaming down his weathered face. He had no idea, when he'd suggested that timid dog in the back kennel to a quiet family looking for a companion, that he was orchestrating a transformation that would ripple through an entire community. "I never imagined," Frank said, his voice cracking with emotion, "that this would happen. Max was going to be put down next month. He'd been here too long and we didn't have the resources. Emma saved him, and he saved her, and somehow they saved all of us." Over the past year, the ripple effects of Emma and Max's story had exceeded anyone's expectations. The school district had implemented a comprehensive animal-assisted therapy program that now served 15 students with various anxiety and communication disorders. Max worked 2 days a week in the program, helping other children find their voices the way he'd helped Emma find hers. But he wasn't the only dog. The success of the program had inspired 5 other therapy dogs from local rescues to join the initiative. Emma's school had become a model for other districts interested in implementing similar programs. Universities were conducting research studies on the efficacy of animal-assisted therapy for selective mutism, with Emma and Max's story as the central case study. Doctor had written several peer-reviewed articles about Emma's therapeutic progress, with her permission, contributing to the scientific literature about human-animal bonds. But perhaps most importantly, Emma had become an advocate. At 10 years old, Emma was traveling to schools and community centers, sharing her story. She wasn't a polished speaker. She still spoke quietly, still sometimes needed to take breaks, still experienced moments of anxiety. But that authenticity was exactly what made her powerful. She wasn't pretending that her selective mutism had been cured. She was demonstrating that it could be managed, that recovery was possible, that being heard mattered more than being loud. One afternoon, Emma sat in a middle school gymnasium in front of 400 middle schoolers, arguably the most judgmental, cruel audience possible. She spoke about her silent years, about the isolation, about the shame. She spoke about Max and what it meant to be truly understood. She spoke about finding her voice not because the world demanded it, but because she discovered she had something worth saying. Afterward, 23 students came to her with their own stories. Some had selective mutism. Some had other anxiety disorders. Some simply felt voiceless in their own lives. Emma listened to each one, often in silence, understanding that sometimes the greatest gift you could give someone was to bear witness to their pain without trying to fix it. "You've given me hope," one girl whispered to Emma. "I thought I was the only one." Emma squeezed her hand. "You're not, and you're not broken. You're just waiting to find the person who understands you." Max, by now certified as an official therapy dog at the highest level, had become something of a local celebrity. He appeared in public service announcements about mental health. He participated in training programs for other therapy dogs. He had his own social media accounts with thousands of followers. But what Emma appreciated most wasn't his fame. It was the moment she saw him working with another child, watching his calm presence transform a terrified kid into someone willing to try. One particularly moving incident occurred when a 7-year-old boy with severe selective mutism was brought to Max by his desperate parents. The boy hadn't spoken to anyone outside his immediate family in 2 years. He was terrified, angry, hopeless. He kicked at Max, rejected the dog's attempts at connection. Emma watched from across the room, remembering her own terror, her own resistance. She didn't interfere. She simply let Max do what he did best: wait, be patient, offer unconditional presence without judgment. It took 3 sessions before the boy touched Max. It took 6 before he whispered a single word. By the 12th session, he was speaking in full sentences to Doctor while sitting beside Max. By the end of that summer, he was attending regular school for the first time, his voice still quiet but genuine, his presence no longer invisible. Max changed his life, the boy's mother said, tears streaming down her face. He gave my son back to us. Emma, overhearing this, understood something profound. Max hadn't just changed her life. He was changing lives. He would continue changing lives. The impact of that one moment in the parking lot 1 year ago was multiplying exponentially, touching people she'd never meet, healing wounds she'd never know about. By Emma's 11th birthday, the local animal shelter had expanded thanks to donations inspired by her story. They renamed one of the adoption wings the Emma and Max Wing, dedicated to rescue animals awaiting their forever homes. The opening ceremony included Emma, Max, and the boy in the striped shirt, now healthy and thriving, inseparable from the mother who had nearly lost him. I don't remember much about that day, the boy said, now 9 years old and speaking confidently. But I remember the dog saving me, and I remember the quiet girl who sent him to help me. I wanted to say thank you. Emma embraced him, and in that moment the circle felt complete. She had been saved. She had saved him, and through Max they had both saved each other. That evening, Emma sat in her backyard with Max, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Her mother joined them, settling onto the grass beside her daughter and dog. "A year ago today," her mother said softly, "we had no idea what was about to happen." "I was so scared," Emma admitted. "At the park, I didn't know if he would understand. I didn't know if I could do it." "But you did," her mother said. "You took a risk, you trusted Max, and you changed everything." Emma rested her head on her mother's shoulder, one hand on Max's warm fur. The girl who once couldn't speak was now speaking to hundreds of people. The quiet girl had found her voice. But more than that, she had discovered that her voice mattered, not because she was famous or because her story was extraordinary, but because it connected her to other people who felt voiceless, who felt lost, who needed to know that being understood was possible. Max pressed his head against her knee, and Emma understood, as she always did, exactly what he was communicating. "You did good. I'm proud of you. We did this together." That night, Emma sat down at her desk and began writing the first chapter of her second book, Max Teaches Others, Stories of Rescue and Redemption. It would feature stories of Max's work with other children, other families, other lives changed by the simple, profound act of truly listening to someone. The girl who couldn't speak had become the girl who speaks for those who can't. And it had all begun with a rescue dog and a secret signal, with a moment of crisis that became a moment of transformation, with the extraordinary realization that sometimes the loudest communication happens in complete and utter silence.